So we are currently recording this excellent session, and we're delighted to have David Schenker with us. And David's expertise will go a long way in our discussion tonight. When we invited David on, little did I know, did any of us know, the state of Israel and the war and Gaza and all the rest that would have gone on and the horrors of October 7th. But David, well, let me share his background, because his background really gives us substance for this wonderful conversation. David is currently the Taube Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute and Director of the Linda and Tony Rubin Program on Arab Politics. He was confirmed by the Senate in 2019, where he serves as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs through January 21. From 2006 to 2019, David was director of the program on Arab politics at the Washington Institute. And from 2002 to 2006, David served in the office of the Secretary of Defense as Levant country's director, the Pentagon's top policy aide on the Arab nations of the Levant. And some hidden facts or figures here as I invite others to join us. I don't know if that's hidden so much as that David lived in Cairo for 2 years. As his mother was saying, he's gone through an excellent Hebrew school background, got a little bit of Ulpan, but when moving to Tel Aviv, the language comes alive. And David's expertise is not just about Israel, but it's really about Israel's neighbors, Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan, those Middle Eastern neighbors to Israel. And this whole scenario, many of us certainly have a history of Israel from its inception to the interactions with the Arabs and the wars, and on and on and on, until this most horrific event most recently. So I've shared a variety of questions, but David's going to do a presentation, and then we'll get into those details. If you have questions along the way, on your Zoom screen, there's a chat feature. We'd strongly encourage you to put questions in the chat. With at least 50 participants, it's going to be tough to do a free-for-all, so a chat would be much better. And Craig Padover will take the questions from chat and will share them with David. I know many of the questions may be duplicated, so he will be able to synopsize those into the most meaningful questions. Please feel free to use that feature. At the end of our program, we may open it up for discussion on either areas that we haven't talked about or questions that you may have. I will give this disclaimer. David doesn't know all the answers. So none of us do. And although we know his expertise and his understanding is significant, I think some of these answers are beyond any of our understanding in this terrible situation that we're in. The questions that we put out there, beyond what David will start with, is we currently, I think we all have an understanding of the status of the war in Gaza at this time. Questions that are unknown is who will govern Gaza when whatever happens is over. I hear more about an old tale of a two-state solution, but we know that Bibi Netanyahu's right-wing party continues to reject that. Security will continue to be a problem. How will that be handled? Has the relationship changed with Israel's neighbors? I think we all sit back and hope nothing more calamitous happens in Lebanon or Jordan or the Yemen. The rebels there will continue to cause chaos, and something catastrophic doesn't happen with Iraq, and the quagmire that we can't come back from should occur. So every day is more of a challenge than before. So I don't want to begin this conversation more than I have taken it on a personal level, but I'd like David to begin and share tonight's program, is Temple Israel's Adult Education, really has a great start. David, I give you the floor.
Well, thanks, Bob and Craig and Mom. It's great to be with the Temple Israel community and back at my old home, really. Can everybody hear me? A little thumbs up there? Great. So we're done talking about how we got here. There's more to discuss about that, but 3 months into the war in Gaza, I think, we're almost 3 months in. What we're watching are horrific images every day, both of going back to the October 7th massacre, but also the resulting massive loss of life of Palestinians in Gaza. Nearly 150 Israeli Defense Forces soldiers have been killed since the start of the ground invasion. And yesterday, we reached a pretty grim milestone in Gaza with 20,000 Palestinians dead. It's a big number. Now, we don't know how many of these Palestinians, of these 20,000, were Hamas. And I don't think we're ever going to know. But even if the Israeli estimates are correct, that they've killed 8,000 members of Hamas, which is a significant number, the civilian losses of Palestinians are high by any standard. In fact, the Biden administration has started describing Israeli aerial bombardments of Gaza as quote unquote indiscriminate. And we can talk about this, I think, a little bit later. There's some implications to that. This will be, I think, debated. You know, we all know that Israel is doing what it can do to avoid civilian casualties in an incredibly difficult operational environment. Nevertheless, you know, I think people will look to compare this someday. Compare it to what? Compare it to the ratios of the United States, for example, operating in areas like Mosul or Fallujah, where we also had very high rates of civilian casualties with terrorists operating in civilian areas. Now, you know, putting aside, I think, the characterization of the Biden administration, they've been amazingly supportive of Israel, and I can't emphasize this enough. You know, the potential costs to the Biden administration domestically in the 2024 elections for this support, the implications for the Democratic Party. I'm happy to talk about these with you later, but it has been a brave and, I think, principled position. And I'm not sure this would have been, not all Republicans would have done the same. And certainly not all Democrats would have done the same. It's been remarkable in terms of both political support and military support. Military support, we know that the Biden administration has bypassed Congress in sending armaments to Israel. This is not unusual. It happened before. The Trump administration that I worked for, Secretary Pompeo, avoided Congress and sent weapons to Saudi Arabia in their fight against the Houthis, notwithstanding, you know, in opposition to, I think, what was at the time congressional opposition. Still, the president did so on Israel. He also sent, most importantly, I think, 2 aircraft carriers to the Med, right? The Ford and one other, in addition to a Marine amphibious ready group. This is an enormous demonstration of support. He did this to prevent the war from spreading and to deter, essentially, Iran and its proxies. And by and large, it's worked. But more importantly, I think, than the military support has been the political support. And you saw the UN Security Council vote a week ago Friday. That was, I think, I don't know if you watched it at home. I watched it. The debate before the US UN representative made, I think, one of the best speeches I'd seen ever by a US official at the UN justifying support for Israel, taking the UN to task, taking UNRWA to task, taking the Red Cross, the Red Crescent and the Red Cross to task for not doing their jobs. It was a remarkable demonstration of support. And then, of course, the United States vetoed this very unbalanced resolution. And it's not only because the resolution was unbalanced, but it was because the administration continues to adhere to the fundamental principle that it started its support for the war in Gaza on, which was there can be no return to the status quo in Gaza. That is, if this war ends and Hamas still is in charge in Gaza, that cannot happen under any circumstance. Not only will there be another war, but it will be even more destructive than the first. And so they have adhered to that principle that Hamas has to go, that no country can possibly live with Hamas on its borders. And this is the right position. And but obviously there are some costs, politically for this. Among others are, international isolation. When the United States vetoed that Security Council resolution, even Great Britain, which continues to support Israel, they abstained. They also didn't veto. Now, maybe they didn't need to because the United States did. They have a very large Muslim and Arab population. They didn't want to risk it. They had domestic concerns. They stood by Israel, but they did not exercise the veto. And I think the Biden administration has just been great on this. And the idea is to give Israel time to achieve their objectives. And they have defined them. At first, they defined them unrealistically. More recently, they have honed. First, it was the eradication. You're not going to eradicate Hamas. We have been fighting Al Qaeda since 9/11. Somebody sent me a video from Al Qaeda this weekend. Just 2 days ago, that I appeared in the video. Al Qaeda used me in their video. They are still out there, right? ISIS is out there, the follow-on group. You can't eliminate an ideology, right? These groups still exist, but Israel has downgraded that, so it rolled it back to 3 principal objectives. One is hostage return. The second is the significant military degradation of Hamas. The third is the end of Hamas rule over Gaza, right? So these are our 3 goals. Hostage return not going well. Hamas has refused to move forward till the end of a war, till a ceasefire with any further prisoner exchange. But we're seeing, I think, progress on military degradation. And ultimately, I think if Israel has enough time, they can end Hamas rule in Gaza. But that won't be, as I said, the eradication of Hamas. And we'll get to this a little bit later. Along the way, we've seen, as I think Bob hinted at, some political differences emerge between Netanyahu and the Biden administration, and that is principally on the issue of the future role of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, basically the PLO that governs the West Bank, they're problematic, right? They do engage in what's called pay for slay. That is, they pay prisoners who kill Israelis stipends. The more Israelis you kill, the more money you get from the Palestinian Authority in prison as stipends for your family. This is problematic. But I remember back in the day, I worked for Secretary Rumsfeld, and I think I'm dealing with an audience that is old enough to remember Rumsfeld. And when we went to Iraq, he said, you go to war with the army you have, right? What else do you have other than the PA? The PA is undoubtedly the Palestinian Authority's imperfect, right? It's not only the pay for slay. We're dealing with a government, the Palestinian Authority, that is corrupt. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, is going into the 19th year of his 4-year term, right? He lacks legitimacy on the ground. He is low energy. I think, Trump would have called him something else, low T, But you know, the leadership is imperfect. However, you know, the United States view, and I think whatever government is in the United States, whether this is the Biden administration or you know, a future Republican administration, the Palestinian Authority is really the only other option, and they have to be energized. They have to be reconstituted. They have to be fixed in some way. But this is the only alternative that really exists. So Netanyahu has opposed Biden on this and said publicly that Israel will not accept that. But just today, I don't know if any of you read Arabic out there, but the Israeli National Security Advisor wrote an op-ed in the London-based Arabic daily Elaf, which is a pan-Arab website with, you know, millions of followers, where he said that actually the Israeli government would accept the Palestinian Authority. In any event, there are other differences between the Biden administration and the Israeli government. One of them is what's going on in the West Bank right now. And the United States is particularly concerned about settler violence against civilian Palestinians, innocent Palestinians. And he's talked to the government of Israel about this, in part because the government of the United States is concerned that provocations by the settlers will result in a third intifada, something Israel definitely doesn't need right now. And so, you know, just a week ago, the Biden administration refused the sale of some 200,000 M16 rifles to Israel, because these were going to be sold to potentially to civilians, settlers living in the West Bank. And the Biden administration didn't want to do it. This was not for the Israeli military, so they refused the sale. There's still a big concern about the broadening of the conflict. Something else Bob mentioned in his talk, you know, over the past 2.5, 3 months, the United States, our troops, our embassy has been attacked more than 100 times by Iranian-backed militia in Iraq. Several dozen American troops have had traumatic brain injuries as a result of drone and missile attacks in Iraq and in Syria. They have also fired at the U.S. Embassy, something that hadn't been done in about a year. Back when I was in the U.S. government, I brought in something called a CRAM, a CRAM. That is a counter rocket artillery and mortar system into the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. It is our only embassy in the world that has one of those. It shoots down incoming artillery and rockets and mortars. These are usually based and positioned in forward Marine operating positions in places like Afghanistan. And I put one in our embassy. It's so dangerous there. And it's shooting down rockets coming into the embassy. This is dangerous. We have retaliated. We have killed Iranians in Syria. We have killed Iranian-backed Iraqi militiamen in Iraq. I don't know if this is going to escalate further. Hezbollah, the A team of the terrorists, of the Iranian-backed terrorists, has been escalating on the border with Israel. But Iran doesn't want to waste Hezbollah to defend Hamas or Palestinians. They want to maintain them as a deterrent for Israel when Israel thinks about attacking Iran's nuclear program. And so they haven't used Hezbollah yet. They are harassing Israel. They've killed 8 or 10 Israeli soldiers on the northern border, destroyed a lot of property, killed a civilian. Israel has killed more than 100 Hezbollahis to date. And it is scary, and it could get out of control, but Iran doesn't want that. The biggest issue, as Bob hinted at, was the Houthis, which is the Iranian-backed militia in Yemen, which their credo is death to America, death to Israel. And they've been well equipped by Iran and basically control half of Yemen. Now, back when I was working for Pompeo, we designated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. The Biden administration delisted the Houthis when they came into office, thinking they could negotiate with them. And now the Houthis are firing missiles at Israel. And the United States is shooting them down over the Mediterranean, as is a coalition of forces. There are some 29 countries that are now have counter missile capabilities, sailing boats in the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea. But these, the Houthis are also firing missiles at international shipping. This is, 12% of the world's seaborne energy passes through Bab el-Mandeb, and everything that passes through the Suez Canal passes through Bab el-Mandeb, and the Houthis control it. So this is a problem that will have to be contended with. And by the way, some of the world's biggest shipping companies, including Maersk, have now stopped shipping through the Red Sea. They're taking another path that takes 11 days more and going around the Cape of Good Hope. Just a few more items before I wrap up and take your questions. Israel has a lot more to do in Gaza before this ends. They're working on the South, Khan Yunis right now. They're working on the tunnel problem. What do they do about the tunnels? They're considering flooding the tunnels. Now, the UN, which of course hasn't even condemned the October 7th attack, is warning Israel about flooding these tunnels because it will result in environmental degradation. Which is that if they flood these tunnels with salt water, that the water will eventually find its way to Gaza's aquifer. I don't think the UN has read the reports that indicate that 95% or 90% of Gaza's aquifer is already fouled by pollution and salt water. So I don't think it will do considerable damage to an already spoiled aquifer. Gaza, if they want to be a regular state, is going to have to do desalinization eventually. And so the aquifer is of less concern to me. I think there's some technical challenges in doing that, including the fact that the tunnel network in Gaza is bigger than the London metro system. So there are 300 kilometers of tunnels, and that's a lot of water to pump, and it's unclear how that would take. The other thing is, in terms of how much work Israel has to do, even if they've killed, and I think optimistically they say they've killed 8,000 Hamas members, there's 30 to 35,000 armed members of Hamas, right? That's a lot of people to kill, right? Or force into submission. How do you do it? Do you have enough time to do it? At what point do they give up? Where do the civilians go, right? Israel drove all the people out of the north to the south so they wouldn't get killed when Israel is doing operations in the north. Now they're doing operations in the south, but there's nothing to go back to in the north. This is another challenge that Israeli military operators and planners are going to have to figure out. What I understand is that we're moving on to a next less intensive phase of operations. That is that Israel is going to lower the rate of aerial operations, bombardments, air operations over Gaza, and start to wind this down after 3 or 4 more weeks, and then move on to targeted raids, right? Small company attacks at targeted objectives. They're also going to send some of their reserves home. Israel has a standing army of 180,000 individuals. They activated 360,000 reserves, right? Their economy isn't working, right? What do you do? How can you pursue this, right? Israel prefers historically to fight short, intensive wars, right? They don't do well with long, drawn-out conflicts. This is why you had the war of attrition, et cetera, after 73, why Israel went to war in 67, preemptively, because they wanted a short war. They don't have the ammunition stores, and they can't keep the reserves mobilized and have an economy. The startup nation is stopped right now. In addition, they're going to send some of these troops home, but they have a threat in the north, right? Which is Hezbollah, which even as I said, Hezbollah is not ostensibly planning on going and launching a war against Israel. The game plan for Hamas on October 7 was Hezbollah's game plan. They took Hezbollah's game plan, which was cross the Israeli border, take hostages, wreak havoc behind enemy lines. Israel now has an additional 100,000 troops in the north, and they're going to have to stay there indefinitely. Because even if they stay there indefinitely, right now there are 250,000 Israelis from the south who lived along the border with Gaza, and in the north who lived in places like Kiryat Shimona, the biggest city in the north, and the kibbutz that I lived on in the north, Kfar Blum, who aren't living at home anymore because they're worried that Hezbollah is going to come across the border and do the same thing that Hamas did to all the border communities with Gaza. These people won't return home until they believe that they are safe, right? And this is a problem. And if asked, I will address this. But there are many in Israel who say that after Israel contains Hamas, they should move on to the next campaign in the north, because it's not going to be enough. Hezbollah cannot be deterred necessarily. So how does this all end? It's really impossible to say. I could barely predict the past. I can't, not going to predict the future. It's hard to see Hamas giving up, right? I talked about Hezbollah a minute ago. Hezbollah in 2006 took a brutal beating from Israel. And at the end of the war, they were still standing and firing rockets into Israel, and they declared divine victory. And I think that's Hamas's plan, right? Stick around, have a couple thousand people left. Never mind, they're not worried about what happened to the people of Gaza. They have little regard for the people of Gaza. They are martyrs for the Palestinian cause in Hamas's mind. But even if Israel succeeds, they're not going to eradicate Hamas. How many thousands of Hamas militiamen are wandering around Gaza, preventing the stabilization or a transfer of power to any other authority in Gaza? It's very messy. Who stabilizes the forces, the Gaza? The United States is talking about an Arab force. Egypt has actually remarkably said they might be willing to consider that. There are other forces other Arab countries that might be willing to put troops in, but not if there are Hamas guys running around with guns, right? That Israel may have to respond to. Can you imagine Israel having to go after Hamas guys and killing a couple Jordanian troops, peacekeepers in Gaza? It's not a pretty thought. Can the PA go in? Well, you remember back, Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. In 2006, the Bush administration that I worked for, we believed in democracy. We said, let the Palestinians vote. They'll vote for freedom. They'll vote for, the better life. And they voted 40% to elect Hamas to the parliament. And when they couldn't take over power and elect a prime minister that was Hamas, they had a coup. And they threw the Palestinian Authority out in 2007. Well, can the Palestinian Authority go back? Well, there are no more troops for the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. They're going to have to be trained up in a place like Jordan or in Egypt. They're certainly not ready now. And then there's the issue of Egypt. What is Egypt going to do? There were 18,500 Palestinians working in Israel on October 7th who had working permits. They were the second largest employer of Palestinians in Gaza. I can tell you for sure, there's not going to be another Gazan ever working in Israel, right? Israel and Gaza are getting a divorce, right? Israel thought it had a divorce in 2005. This is going to be, they're going to go to court now. And so they're going to have to work somewhere. And they can't hire 528,000 Palestinians to work in the government in Gaza, right? already it's the largest public sector employer. It's the largest employer. They're going to have to find somewhere else to work, and Egypt might have to take on a bigger role. So this is all going to take time. There's going to need to be elections in Israel. There's going to need to be new Palestinian leadership. And Israel, finally, is going to have to spend more on its military. You know, their GDP has risen in recent years quite a bit because of the high-tech revolution there. But they have lowered their percentage of GDP from 10% or 9.5% to 4.5%. It's going to have to go back up. The threats are severe, and we're not just talking about Gaza. Israel got complacent. They did Gaza on the cheap. They needed more troops in the West Bank, and they didn't have enough up north either. 180,000 is insufficient. They're going to have to increase not only their budget, but the size of their standing army. All right, I'm done. I've said enough. I'm happy to take any and all of your questions.
So there's been a number of very good questions. I'm going to try to summarize, combine a couple of questions that I've seen so far in the chat room. I encourage everyone to continue to write down any questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. One of the first questions was about Israel not forming a better worldwide coalition to get the hostages released. And kind of related to that, someone said, why is Israel doing such a poor job in the publicity department, making the case for Israel's right to defend itself? So I think the two are kind of related. David, can you respond to those two questions?
Yeah, I can. Let me start with publicity. Israel is always blamed for, everyone always says Israel's Hasbara is terrible, right? Their publicity, their propaganda, their messaging. I don't think it's a matter of messaging. We see enormous crowds coming out against Israel. I got a kid at Brown. He's here seeing a lot of stuff on college campuses. And yet, just 2 months before this happened, Pakistan expelled 1.5 million Afghan refugees. From 2011 to today, the government of Syria has killed 500,000 Syrians with the help of Russia. 500,000, mostly Sunnis, something that to me resembles a genocide, an actual genocide. I didn't see any protests in the West about this. I think, I hate to say this, right? But there might be an element of anti-Semitism here. When the Syrian government kills Syrians, this happens. We expect this. When Israel defends itself, it's something very different. And so Israel is judged differently. Now, I believe we should have a much higher standard for Israel, but I think we have to look at, the situation they've been put in. And I don't want to relieve Israel of blame for any of this. Now, they ended their occupation of Gaza. Gaza's occupation was ended in 2005. Now, the UN still calls it an occupation. I don't know how. Israel built a wall when Hamas took over, but so did Egypt, right? Egypt built a 20-foot concrete wall on their border with Gaza and made it 15 foot deep. And also, they flooded the tunnels that went into Gaza, but nobody complains about that. I think there's, very different standards here. And I think we have to accept that. That's not going to change. And I don't advise complaining about that. You're just going to get some agita. There's nothing to be done about this. As for the Worldwide Coalition for Hostage Release, I think this relates, as you said, to the first one. There was, a definite level of support and empathy for Israel for about 2 days. about 2 days. I just don't think there is that type of international sympathy. Now, I've been very pleased by and large, actually, for European support. I think the UK has been great. I think Germany has been, very good on this. France, great, unreliable, a little fickle, right? I think countries with, that also, have domestic considerations when they take their positions at the UN. But you're not going to get this coalition. And I think the United States is in Israel's corner and will be so, but not indefinitely. And that's regrettable. But I think a reality. The United States also needs diplomatic support for priorities in Ukraine. The United States also needs diplomatic support for priorities in Bab el-Mandeb. The United States also needs support for coalitions vis-a-vis China and for what they're doing in the South China Sea. There's a whole host of priorities the United States has, and it's difficult to juggle them, but you can't use all of your diplomatic capital on one issue indefinitely.
So, David, there was also a question. There's been some reports in the last few days about Hamas leaders going to Egypt. I read myself about someone from Qatar was also there. And there's also been publicity that the 3 leaders of Hamas have not been captured or killed. And that Israel's economy cannot continue like this. World opinion cannot continue like this. What is the end game if there is not complete victory and a complete elimination of Hamas? How does this end? I know you started talking about it, but based on the recent developments of Hamas going to Egypt, is this the beginning of the end? The end of the beginning, something?
Well, I think we're looking at the beginning of the end. Not necessarily of Hamas. Like I said earlier, I don't think we can truly eradicate Hamas, right? It's an idea. This is an organization that's been around since 1987. They're going nowhere. They have social institutions. It's going to be hard to do. You got to weaken the organization. I think a couple folks where I work at the Washington Institute recently, they wrote something about divisions within the Hamas leadership, about where to go from here, about the leaders from the outside wanting to make a deal, leaders from the inside not wanting to make a deal. I think that's something that is a positive development if true. The Hamas leaders are in Egypt to talk about where they're at with the Qataris and the Egyptians. They met earlier, the Qataris and the Egyptians, with Barnea, the head of the Mossad, to talk about prisoner exchange, as well with Bill Burns, the head of the CIA and actually a former assistant secretary of state for Near East Affairs. Met him in Qatar, last week. Hamas doesn't appear to be moving at that, but Israel set the bar very high initially. We're going to put the head of Yahya Sinwar on a pike, right? We are going to put Mohammed Deif's head, the military leader of Hamas, on a pike, right? We're going to, put it on the walls of Jerusalem, and we're going to get every Hamas leader. And how long did it take us to get Bin Laden? How long did it take us to get Saddam? There are there's 300 kilometers of tunnels. 2.2 million people living in what is a smaller piece of territory, but in many ways a harder nut to crack. And so Israel set the bar high. I have no doubt that, like Munich, they will hunt down and kill every one of these leaders that was responsible for it. But this shouldn't be the definition of success for this war, right? This is to dislodge Hamas as an effective ruling body of Gaza, and to create other possibilities on the ground. And I think that, with as Israel winds down with some Arab support. I think Arab countries would love to see Hamas defenestrated, right? They are not supporters of this organization. Egypt, may I remind you, one day in 2013 killed almost 2,000 members of their Muslim Brotherhood chapter, right? Hamas is the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood, 2,000 in a day. And then Sisi, since 2013, has built 31 new prisons to house all the members of the Muslim Brotherhood that remain, right? All these countries want to see Hamas go bye-bye, right? They want Israel to succeed. But they got streets, right? The governments differ a little bit. It's a very evocative issue for the street in these countries.
David, there's some people, and this is a question that was asked, who say that Hamas and the Palestinian people, that there's a disconnect, that they don't have the support. And then you read other opinion polls that show that absolutely, in fact, that their popularity and strength has increased as a result of the war, and even after the devastation of 20,000 dead. So, I mean, where do you come out in terms of, does Hamas represent at least the Gazans and perhaps even West Bank West Bank residents? Does Hamas represent the Palestinian people?
So it's a great question, I give you some data points. I don't have a great or definitive answer for you on this, but and of course the last time I was in Gaza was like 2000, so I don't have up to date on the ground intel for you on that. So before the war, there was a woman named Amal Jamani, who's a professor at Princeton, who does polling that's funded by the State Department. I met her when I was at the State Department. I brought her in and talked to her in like 2020. And it's called the Arab Barometer. And she wrote an article in Foreign Affairs magazine, and she had done a big poll in Gaza prior to the war in like September. And she found that Hamas wasn't particularly popular, right? That they're not corrupt, but they're brutal and capricious. People don't like the social restrictions, the authoritarianism, the constricted social space. I have a colleague from the Washington Institute, a guy named David Pollack, who we've got a part of the institute called Project Fikra, which is Project Idea. Fikra means idea in Arabic. And they do polling in the Arab world. And they also found the same on the eve of the war in Gaza, that Hamas wasn't popular. Oh, what happens? Well, first of all, and in the West Bank, I think they're increasing in popularity, by the way. And I think that if Israel wasn't occupying the West Bank, I think that Hamas would take over there. Right? I think there are many areas where the PA does not exist in the West Bank. But how does the war impact that? Well, do people rally around the flag? Are they happy? Well, you can watch all the videos. I watch social media. I watch a lot of Arabic social media, and you have people from Gaza who are cursing Hamas, right, and then winding up dead, right? Somehow winding up dead, being killed by Hamas, or people that show up on Al Jazeera, and you can see that on memory, right? These clips of people who are interviewed in hospitals. They say, "Yeah, the Israelis are bombing us, but why does Hamas have to operate from civilian areas and put us all in danger? They're getting us killed." You see that. I don't know which way that's going to go, but I can ask you, Craig, an equally challenging question. What is the war in Gaza and October 7th going to do to the Israeli electorate? Right, when Netanyahu is vanquished, right, is thrown out of office.
And that is a question that someone asked as well.
Yeah.
How does this impact Netanyahu? Yeah. And more importantly, did something Netanyahu do prior to October 7th impact? There's been all kinds of speculation, but of course now the most important thing is the war. Is winning the war.
Yeah. Well, so Netanyahu will be, before the war, he called himself Mr. Security. He will be held accountable, much like Golda Meir was held accountable for 1973. this will be his legacy, an indelible legacy. And there's no avoiding that. And I think, not only was it that during a period of incredible, danger from the outside, threat from Hezbollah and Hamas, that this guy chose, and Iran going nuclear, right? During this time, this guy focused on judicial reform, something that was incredibly divisive for Israeli society, ostensibly, and I could be wrong about this, but to keep his coalition partners happy and keep them out of prison, or at least, out of trial. I mean, all right, that's, I'm getting into politics here, but, this guy does have several indictments weighing over his head, and serving as prime minister prevents him from being held accountable one way or the other for these alleged crimes. Whether he missed intel, yeah, 100% Israel missed intel. They had early warning. They ignored early warning. I think, at the end of the day, Israel was complacent. They didn't believe that Hamas was bold enough, brave enough, smart enough, creative enough, committed enough to do this. There was a reading of Hamas that they wanted to somehow, that if you placated them economically, let Qatar send in hundreds of millions of dollars, that they would want to rule over Gaza and get fat. And it turns out that not everybody cares about the economy or cares about the people they rule. I mean, that's an easy one. Ask the Iranians, right? I mean, right? Tehran thinks the same way, right? They're a resistance economy. They'd rather take the money that's coming in and build an amazing infrastructure underground for military purposes. So there were a lot of areas that Netanyahu kicked the can down the road when he was in power or not. In Lebanon, for years, every Israeli official that came to town would talk about the threat of Hezbollah's precision-guided munitions program. That is, Hezbollah has 150,000 smart rockets and missiles. And they had a project to upgrade them from dumb rockets to smart rockets. And they were making incredible progress. And then all of a sudden it dropped off Israel's radar screen. Well, I don't think Israel has 150,000 Iron Dome interceptors that they can point north, right? They kick the can down the road. And to be fair, they're not the only people that do it. I mean, we've been saying for years we'll not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon, and they get closer every year. So, they're not the only ones.
All right. There's a comparison being made here between our withdrawal from Iraq and Afghanistan and the eventual withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. I mean, will it be as chaotic? Can anyone predict? Will there be some measure of stability and safety for Israel at the end of this war?
Well, listen, I mean, as much as I praised President Biden earlier for his dealings in Gaza, in the Gaza war, I will condemn him and criticize him for how he handled the Afghanistan withdrawal, which I think was disastrous and undermined U.S. deterrence and image abroad. And, frankly, not only our commitment to our partners, but our support for women's rights and human rights throughout the world, condemning, 50% of the population to third-class citizenry, basically indefinitely, forever. However, Israel had a chaotic withdrawal in 2000 when it left Lebanon, right? They left their weapons behind, their tanks, they abandoned their allies, they left while people were shooting at them. I hope Israel has learned the lesson of that. That emboldened Hezbollah incredibly. So I think Israel understands now that they considered Hamas a tactical problem. And I think on October 7th, they understood that it was strategic. Not strategic that Hamas is going to destroy Israel, but if Israel can't have the confidence of its population that they can defend them in within their borders, never mind the West Bank, right? Settlements. I'm talking about within their borders in southern Israel, in these communities and kibbutzim, Kfar Aza, etc., Sderot, or in the north in Kiryat Shmona, which is one of Israel's top 15 cities. If they cannot defend, and the people who are living in the border regions do not feel like their government can defend them, this is not going to be a successful, confident country that can attract not only people, but, well, not only foreign direct investment, but people. Who's going to want to live in half of Israel if they feel like they're constantly at threat of Hezbollah or Iranian proxies like Hezbollah or Hamas coming to get them? So they're going to have to succeed in Gaza, and they can't withdraw in a way that shows weakness, and they can't withdraw under fire. Hamas will always be able to fire one off, right? You can build a rocket in your basement, right? You don't need military infrastructure for this, right? There are guidebooks on how to do this in the internet. The United States was being blown up by IEDs that were being planted by people who read how to do them in Iraq and Afghanistan on the internet. That's always going to happen, but people generally have to feel like their army and their state can protect them. And so I don't see that for Israel and Gaza withdrawal like that, frankly.
There's a question about the polarization in Israel pre-October 7th. Obviously, right now, everyone is united in Israel. Do you ever see the right, center, left issues and related, as you discussed earlier, related to Netanyahu's judicial problems, etc.? I mean, can Israel, will Israel's stress polarization between Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, demographics, all of that, is that going to continue to be as big a factor in the future, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think the Ashkenazi Sephardi thing is pretty much done. I don't see that as a significant ongoing division in Israel. I see, right, far right versus center right as the real division. I don't see any. There's no left in Israel anymore. Not anything significant, and that part of that is demography, and part of that is just the region. The great scholar Bernard Lewis, from Princeton, once said, that everyone thought that Israel was going to come to the Middle East and Europeanize the Middle East, but it turned out that Israel came to the Middle East and became Middle Eastern, right? And so their politics really reflect much of what's going on in the region, and they're right of center, but this is a general global trend. I don't see that changing. The question, as I asked, sort of posed before, was whether the Israeli electorate is going to go even further right because of what happened on October 7th and say, oh, we're never going to have a Palestinian partner, or they're going to say, well, the only way we're going to have even a possibility of maintaining a level of global support from the West is by embracing an imperfect, Palestinian Authority partner and helping them, trust but verify, go in and do what we need to do periodically, but do something that is, who signed Oslo, right? The Israeli government approved Oslo by the parliament. I think the Knesset approved it by one vote. They won by one vote, right? This wasn't, Camp David too. Same thing, a very narrow support in Knesset. There's going to have to be a coalition that can find a way to move forward with some Palestinian partner at some point. But once again, I don't know what's going to happen to the Israeli electorate as a result of this, saying, hey, we finally got to cut a deal here and have the international community police everything that comes into this state because we can't trust them, and figure out some regime that'll figure it out, or but I don't know what direction that's going to go. That's a big question for me.
Greg, you have to unmute.
Yeah. Now, I I mean, was a question about the tunnels. If they're inundated with salt water, could that affect the Israeli water supply? I mean,
it's a different aquifer, and Israel doesn't depend on aquifers largely. It's mostly desal and the national conveyance. You know, the rainwater, the Jordan, the water in the Kinneret. Yeah.
Okay, good. There was also a question about the munitions. Where is Israel getting their munitions? Do they manufacture their own? Is there a finite supply? You know, that's.
Yeah, there is a finite supply. So the United States has something called the War Reserve Stockpile in Israel, and we keep like $1 billion of prepositioned weapons in Israel, ostensibly for us to use. But Israel can take them out at any time. They got to replenish them later. So they can use that. You know, they need more stuff. And there was an article actually written recently sort of accusing Israel of using a very high percentage of so-called dumb bombs in Gaza, which is why the civilian casualties are so high. And we used a higher percentage of smart bombs in Mosul and against the war against ISIS, et cetera. But to do so, the United States Central Command, our military component that deals with the Middle East, we had to take weapons out of like PACOM, out of our stores of smart weapons to fight China, right? And defend Taiwan. We had to take them out of there to bring them to fight ISIS. Right. And so Israel has to keep some smart weapons in reserve because they never know when they're going to have to go out and whack Hezbollah or whack Iran. Right. They can't, right. And so there is a limited supply of these. We, frankly, don't have enough of these ourselves. And we've been supplying for the better part of a year and a half the government of Ukraine with all kinds of munitions. And rightly so. But we cannot continue to produce at the level that we are producing and expect to meet the higher need. It's just, you know, it's not doable. So either we have to produce more. There is a domestic Israeli armament, you know, component. They build missiles, smart missiles, all kinds of stuff. Domestically, they build you know, Iron Dome, they build Patriots, they build all kinds of, you know, systems. And yet, you know, they build those mostly for export as a profit center. And so, you know, they can't ramp up. It's not scalable necessarily for them, but for us, yeah, I mean, we're going to need more in general. The world is every day an uglier place, regrettably.
I think we've covered all the questions here that I see. If anyone has any questions, there is something called reactions. You can raise your hand. I can look. Let's see here.
Oh, so there's a question about congressional support for Israel. Wait, no, there's Bertina out there.
Yeah,
there's a question.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking here. And perhaps this question has already been answered, in which case I apologize, but you were talking about Lebanon earlier and potentially a war with Hezbollah, which Israel has been talking about as well. If that does happen, given the massive amount of rockets that Hezbollah has, the civilian casualties in that war look very different, I'm guessing. What do you think Israel is willing to stomach to take on that war?
Well, thanks, Regina. It's you know, a difficult question. I mean, we'll go back to you look like you're about 25 years old. Is that right? Maybe less.
I'm 23.
Okay. So are you old enough to remember 2006? No.
I read enough about it, but I don't remember it.
So Hezbollah and Israel went to war. Israel was busy fighting Hamas in Gaza. They kidnapped this guy, Gilad Shalit. And then Hezbollah went and kidnapped, like they killed 4 Israeli soldiers across the border and kidnapped 2 more back to Lebanon. And Israel said, these guys are doing this now. To hell with that. We're going to war with Hezbollah. And they went to war with Hezbollah, and the war lasted 34 days. And every day of that war, I think, Hezbollah fired more than 100 rockets and missiles into Israel. And Israel pounded Hezbollah. They dropped, 7,000 bombs on Lebanon. And 500,000 Israelis had to leave the north. 1 million Lebanese had to leave, South Lebanon. It was pretty brutal. 1,200 Lebanese were killed. I think 400 Israelis were killed. People were living in bomb shelters for a month in half of Israel. Anything that comes after this is dramatically worse. Hezbollah now has these things called the Radwan forces, which are special forces. Israel has been bombing their bases in the south of Lebanon for the past 2 months. They've killed like over 100 Hezbollahis. But there are these 100,000 to 150,000 rockets, and many of them are now upgraded to smart rockets, which means Hezbollah can hit strategic targets in Israel. And I'm not just talking about the chlorine factory in Haifa. I'm talking about Israeli airfields. I'm talking about Dimona. I'm talking about Palmachim, Air Force Base, where Israel launches the Arrow missile from. They can hit every square meter of Israel and have a degree of accuracy. And Israel doesn't have enough Arrows, Patriots, Iron Domes to contend with this, not nearly enough. And Israel said after 2006 that they had acquired better targeting in Lebanon, that they have now, thousands of good targets in Lebanon. But after after a week and a half or 2 weeks in Lebanon last time, Israel started hitting bridges and tunnels in Junia. Now, Bertina, have you ever been to Lebanon?
I haven't been to Lebanon.
So Junia is in like 40 minutes north of Lebanon, lovely city. It's like 95% Christian. There's no Hezbollah up there right now. Why are they hitting, Junia? It's because they ran out of targets. So I think, I hope Israel can do better, but, and I've been saying this for some time, it's sad, but it's somewhat inevitable. Hezbollah's capabilities only grow in the absence of action. And I don't want there to be a war. And Israel has delayed this for many years now. But I think it is, barring regime change in Iran, it may be inevitable. I mean, I fear it. I think that what you see from people living in their shelters now in Tel Aviv, Israel hasn't seen anything yet compared to what it's going to be with Hezbollah, and it's going to be really, really nasty. But one wonders what it's going to look like 10 years from now if Israel doesn't do something.
David, I see 3 hands raised. I hope this is in the right order. Manny Haber's got a question.
Yep.
David, good to see you.
Hey, Manny.
Hey, I heard something recently that really struck me. The ages of the people on this Zoom. And there was a whole discussion on the perception of Israel for those of us who were old enough to remember the 67 war, remember the 73 war, remember what it was like in the 70s and 80s, versus like you have a child in college right now. The college kids, don't know the David of it. I'm calling like David and Goliath. Israel used to be the David. Now it's looked upon as the Goliath. And I'm concerned about these uneducated, historically, college kids, high school kids, that in 20 years and 30 years are going to be the members of our Congress. And where do you see our Congress 30 years from now in its support for Israel?
Manny, it's a tough one. I'm sure you saw the piece in the Wall Street Journal from last week or a week and a half ago from the river to the sea, what river, what sea, right?
Yeah.
Like college kids, the Euphrates to the Nile. What are we talking about here? I mean, nobody knows history. There's this, and okay, I don't. The Washington Institute and myself. I mean, I'm a registered foreign policy Republican, but I'm nonpartisan. I really am nonpartisan. I see myself as independent thinker. I don't, toe the line and on any particular issue. But there is this sort of, intersectionality out there that, Palestinian cause is now seen as, it's seen as a colonial issue and an issue of colonial. And I think it's wrong. I don't know how to convince people. And I frankly, I don't really try. I'm not going to college campuses and necessarily I'm going to Pepperdine, but that's not, not a thing. I'm not doing the college campus tour. But, I say, listen, I support Palestinian nationalism, but, how can somebody who supports Palestinian nationalism deny the Jewish nationalism, right? I mean, Zionism, right? I mean, to negate that, I think it seems to me to be, but we're dealing a world of ideas that are very difficult to counter. And, you look at the polling and, it suggests that among young people, there's, sort of a fraying of the traditional or, a transition from the traditional positions. And that someday, the leading supporters of Israel and the United States, if not already, are going to be the evangelical Christians. And fine by me, right? I mean, it can't be Jews, right? We're just 2% of the United States, right? I'd much rather, us have, support of a huge sort of very important bloc that believes this is a sort of a religious prerogative and important to them. However, I think this is going to create problems for people like my mom in New Jersey with the Democratic Party, that their party is abandoning them, that they don't believe in these sort of traditional positions. And I think this is for the Democratic Party to sort out. But, this used to be a place for people called neocons, which is how I, eventually became a Republican with the neocons. I'm a chastened neocon, but I'm very liberal on social issues and very hawkish and supportive of Israel and foreign policy issues.
Hank.
There's another question from Alina Lerner. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Hi, it's Boris and Alina here.
Hi.
Thanks. David, it's a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. So my question is related to Manny's question, in terms of the support in the US and political kind of winds that are changing. So what is your view if Trump is elected again in the next election or Republicans, come to power? And how would that change in terms of support for Israel, support for a military action, whether it's against Hamas, Hezbollah?
I guess, yeah, my question is, Nikki Halevy we love and we think she's going to be very rational. My question is, you worked under Trump administration. If he gets reelected, he's been very irrational. What will he have the support of Israel? Because I agree with you, a Biden administration has been great. What do you think Trump will do?
This is the kind of question that I don't like to answer. But Nikki Haley obviously is great. I worked for Pompeo. I thought Pompeo is amazing on these kind of issues. Trump is I think typically unpredictable, and this is a strength and a weakness. Right? Nobody knows what he's going to do on any particular thing. I I can't weigh in on what Trump's Middle East policy is going to be. You know, he is a big supporter of Israel, but you know, I don't know what a second term looks like. And you know, the key issue, as you know, the policy is people. So who ends up working for Trump in a second administration? This, I don't know, right? I mean, Ronald Reagan wouldn't have been the amazing president he was if he didn't have the people working for him that he did, right? These are, this is critical, I think, for any administration. So, listen, I think, I once again can't predict the future, but there is a reservoir of support still in Congress for Israel. It's deep. I mean, look how many people came out for Herzog right after October 7th, right? I think that will remain for some time, but I am worried about splits in parties in the Democratic Party over Israel in the long run, and I don't know what that looks like.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't give you more on that.
Yeah,
thank you.
Hey, Ron, how are you?
Hi, David. Good to see you.
Great to see you.
Are you talking from Washington or from New Jersey?
Yeah, I'm talking from my house in Maryland.
Okay. Two questions, but one that really concerned me was the expose in the New York Times about the $500 million or $1 billion of funding that the Israelis knew about and ignored and basically financed all the Hamas tunnels and financed everything.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the impression that even today, 8,200 unit and other units in Israel that can be offensive has taken down that network of financial support for Hamas. And I'm just curious to know what is the position now, as far as you know, in taking down that infrastructure.
Well, thanks. Truth in Advertising. Ron, you're from where in New Jersey are you?
Franklin Lakes.
Franklin Lakes. So Ron is the great golfer. And
no. Now you're going to get in trouble. I can't win any bets anymore.
So Ron, I read this in the New York Times, and I was like, why is this on the front page? That Qatar is giving $100 million a month to Gaza. This has been. It's not even an open secret. This has been open, well known. There's a guy from Hamas, Simon Henderson from the Washington Institute, who went to Qatar and met the guy who brings the suitcase in every month to Israel and then goes into Gaza to drop it off for Hamas. This is done, like he met him in Qatar. This is well known for years. And this was the Netanyahu, I think, idea, which was essentially, if you pay these guys off, they just want to build Gaza, they want to have money, they want to rule, they don't want to attack, they're not ideological, you can buy them off. And so, it comes as a surprise because we've been hearing about the Gaza tunnel network, right, which suddenly became a problem. We've been hearing about this for more than a decade. Right, in 2018, when Egypt, they removed 70,000 people, Egyptians, living on the border of Gaza in Rafah in Egypt. 70,000 people. They built a buffer zone of a mile. Right, they forcibly transferred 70,000 people so they could dig up every tunnel and make sure that there would be no tunnels coming from Gaza. We know this. And so this was part of Israel policy and success of Israeli governments. I mean, I don't get the sense that Lapid stopped this when he was in, or Gantz when he was briefly in. This has been ongoing for, a decade and a half. Bad thinking.
No, my question though is what are they doing now? Is this network are they still permitting this to go on, or are they going to
no, they're stopping it. Ron, the United States government issued a whole bunch of new targeted sanctions. They spoke to the Qataris. They actually agreed. There's some question about whether these guys are now, the leadership that's living there is going to have to relocate to Algeria, or, okay, I prefer them in Algeria than in Beirut, or in Tehran. But yeah, something's being done about this. But it took, I think the Israelis actually hadn't made the decision about what they wanted to do with the Gazan tie to Qatar until very recently, when Hamas said we're not going to exchange any more prisoners. All of a sudden, you don't need Qatar if there's not going to be any prisoner exchange.
Okay.
Right? There's no other need for that.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Dave. One final question. Someone someone by the name of Linda Schenker.
Hey, Ron, meet my mom, by the way. There's my mom right here.
Right down the street in Ridgewood. So question for you, Dave. Two questions, actually. One is, do you have any sense of how much of the Hamas rocketry and munitions has been destroyed? Because that was one of the goals. And also the second question is, what would you see as the reasons that Israel would accept a ceasefire?
All right. Well, Mom, I don't have numbers for you at all, and I've spoken to a number of Israelis. I don't think they have a sense of the amount of they can't even tell you how many Hamas guys they've killed. Right? They say, well, 5,000, maybe 8,000. If you find a stockpile of rockets, you find it, you can take it, you can lay it out, you could bring the press in, take a picture of it. If you blow it up from the air, you don't know how much you've blown up, right? And you don't know, as Rumsfeld said again, the unknown unknowns or the known unknowns. You don't know what you don't see, how much they actually have. Israeli intel is good, but not good enough to know these guys are going to launch a major attack. You think they know how many actually rockets they have? I don't think they know. I think they have an estimate that is probably a fair estimate, but and they'd probably say, if I had to guess, I'd probably say they'd say they have 20-25% of it. Okay. I don't think many more. And the reason for a ceasefire, I think the only way they will do a ceasefire is if they, once again, get Sinwar's head on a pike and put it on the walls of Jerusalem, get their hostages back, right? Which I can't see happening before a ceasefire, and maybe not even after. I mean, why would Hamas do it? I mean, they're not humanitarians, right? These people are ideologues that operate on principles similar, as we saw on October 7th, to ISIS, right? Putting babies in ovens, beheading people, mass rape, etc. It's hostages and the end of Hamas rule in Gaza. I don't think any of these are going to be clean breaks. We may not even know when we achieve that level of chaos. Right? When Hamas, there's a breakdown right now about civil authority in Gaza. Who's providing what services to anybody, and who's doing the policing? I don't think that exists. Does Hamas still rule Gaza? Well, they still exist in numbers too large to say they don't. Right? We're getting back to what the good position of the United States from day one, which is there cannot be a return to the status quo. And I don't know when we're going to get to the point, and I don't know if Israel knows when we've reached that point. It's an odd situation, and a lot of unknowns going forward.
Lucky I have access to you more than the Zoom.
Anytime, Mom.
Okay. Mr. Smolin, I think you want to wrap things up, and
Thank you.
Thank everybody.
All right, thank you very much. David, I want to say that it's been exceptional what you've shared with us. Your level of knowledge has given us a whole different reflection on what's going on. You exceeded my expectations, and the information you shared has given me more insights. I think all of us in the audience have some history, names, culture, geography, and a better understanding of this. And if anything, this has become more complex than I ever dreamed it could be. And I'm sure it's even worse than that. And you didn't stir us up, or stir up the complexity. You just brought more of it to the surface. So I really appreciate, and we all do, I don't want to put my name in this, I'm sure all of us in the audience appreciate it, especially your mother, the facts and information that you shared. You really did an extraordinary job, which may be what's part of your life and your understanding, which I'm sure it is, but it's not ours. And your presence really made a significant difference in this conversation. We are all stronger, better, more knowledgeable as a result of this talk. And I want to say thank you on behalf of all the participants, on behalf of Temple Israel. Linda and Craig, thank you so much for doing this. A little round of applause, if you will, on your screens for David. I think that is truly an excellent job. And thank you for taking the amount of time you did tonight. I know we dragged you away for more than an hour to have these conversations. And I imagine if we continued, we could go for another hour, but that would be unfair, and we're not going to do that. So on behalf of all of us, on behalf of Temple Israel, our adult education, we are stronger, we are better. We hope that we can connect up with you in the future, and you'll help us with more insight. And we can only pray for peace and hope this hostility changes, and we can all have more comfort in this rather than more chaos, because I know it's stomach churning for me as it is for so many of us who are watching or participating or know people in Israel. So thank you again. You did a terrific job. We are in your depth for doing this. I really appreciate it. And to everyone else, thank you for participating and being here. Please go to www.synagogue.org, where we'll put the link if you'd like to share this conversation with your friends or neighbors. And with that said, I'm going to go to our stop recording.